Okay, so title of the video is Are Baptists Protestants? Right, so the reason why I've chosen to do this video is because in my own experience I find a lot of Baptists and non-denominationals, they're not comfortable with the word Protestant. They don't like the word Protestant, and whenever I ask them why they're not comfortable with it, they can never really give me a true answer. It would always be, oh, I don't like the word, I don't like the association, I'm just born again. Obviously, there was a lot of blood shed in the Reformation in Northern Ireland, things like that. Maybe they don't want to be associated with fighting and war and all that kind of thing. Um, it's never really been clear, but I've had numerous sort of like reasons given to me why they don't like it. So I thought I'd do a little bit of research and find out exactly why that is the case. So the first thing I had to do is establish what the word Protestant actually means. So Protestant, as you could guess, is protestant. So it comes from the word protesting against the church. Now, the church back in the 15th century was the Roman Catholic Church, certainly in the West anyway. So they were a movement, like any protesting group and lobby. They were a movement to try and change the Roman Catholic Church from within. Obviously, that didn't happen. That's why the Catholics set up counter-Reformation groups and did eventually change themselves. But by that point, the Protestants started to take real momentum and start to build up their own churches, which of course the Roman Church refused to be in communion with. So what you had in the 15th and 16th century is you had the Lutheran movement, which came from Martin Luther, the Augustinian monk, who famously put the 95 Theses on the door at Wittenberg Church, and printed numerous copies of the Bible, which around that time was actually illegal. So you had him, you had John Calvin, a French lawyer and theologian who basically extended on Luther's teaching of grace with his own sort of two-pence piece on it. The difference is his views on grace was basically double predestination and a sort of a lower view on sacraments. So you had him, and obviously the Huguenots offshooted from them. And then, of course, you had Zwingli. Zwingli was a Dutchman who ended up living in Switzerland, and he too, very similar to Calvin, he had sort of a lower church view of the sacraments, but was a Catholic. He was a Catholic priest, so he would have still agreed with the fundamental core doctrines of Catholicism. So that would include Mary's perpetual virginity. In fact, all three of them upheld that belief. I don't think they had issues with the deuterocanonical books either. I think Luther may have done, but I don't think Calvin and Zwingli did. But by and large, they agreed with most things in Catholicism, other than the corruption of the popes and bishops taking money for indulgences. That was a massive one. That was pretty much what caused all the upheaval in the first place. And I think the belief of purgatory, which obviously ties in with that. They were the two main things, and of course not being able to give the lay people the scriptures. So that's three main things. So these movements started to get momentum. They started to take real force in their countries, and to the point where in France they were completely outlawed. To the point if they were to be seen, they'd be killed. So this was heavy stuff around that time. Now, you're probably wondering, how does this have anything to do with Baptists being Protestants? Well, I can tell you it does, because during the same time, we had a movement called the AnaBaptists. And the AnaBaptists, just like modern-day Baptists, believed in a believer's baptism. So regardless of whether you'd been sprinkled as an infant or not, they would insist upon you baptizing yourself as a profession to the fact that you've received an inward grace and you truly believe. And there'd be a real emphasis on being born again. This was the Anabaptist experience. But there's a problem. The Anabaptists were not liked by any of the big hitters, the big Protestant, I don't know, whatever you want to call activists, I guess, at the time. They weren't liked, and no one wanted to be associated with them, and they were heavily persecuted. I mean, I was speaking to someone the other week, and we were talking about the Huguenots, and he said to me that they were Anabaptists, and I had to correct him. I said, no, the Huguenots were not Anabaptists. In fact, the Huguenots did not like the Anabaptists. So that's not true. Yeah, the Huguenots were persecuted in France, but they were not the Anabaptists. And the Anabaptists were actually persecuted everywhere they went at that time. They were completely outlawed. So when you think about the classical definition of the word Protestant, around that time, the 15th, 16th century, they wouldn't meet that criteria because they were seen as a radical group. You know, like I said, Protestant is protesting a church, right? It's not completely saying, right, we're going to do things completely different to you guys, and we're going to do our own thing, and we're going to completely cut ourselves off from your entire history, including the creed, right? Obviously, fast forward 100 years, you get into the 16th century. You got people like John Smith bursting into the scene. There's a lot of English men that would call themselves Baptists that believed in adult believers' baptism, and they were kind of respected a little bit more because John Smith was actually an Anglican, so he had that behind him. However, John Smith did denounce himself from the Church of England, so I would argue if the Baptist movement in England was a branch off the Church of England. I mean, the Church of England would completely deny that, and they would probably call them out and out heretics. But to a lot of Baptists that come out of that circle, they would say, no, we're just an offshoot, we're just a branch coming from the mainstream Protestants. I'm not sure. To be honest, not in England anyway. However, there is a nuance. So, as you know, you had the Puritans. They made waves in England under Presbyterianism. And then you had migration to Ireland. And then, from Ireland and Scotland, you had migration to America. And the Puritans started to argue about polity and all that kind of thing. And then they split off. We had the Congregationists, the Presbyterians. And then what happened within the Congregationists, and this is still very evident in today's context, there were some Congregationists who believed in adult baptism. And around the 17th, 18th century, they were actually kicked out of their church. They're like, no, we can't go along with that. So that what they did is they started the Reformed Baptist movement. And Reformed Baptist movement is massive in America now. It's huge. I mean, you've got the likes of John McCarthy, Voodoo Bockham, James White. Got, you know, a lot of big, well-known evangelists. Even some of the mega churches, they come from the Reformed Baptist movement. Now they would have a shout for being Protestants because they have branched off from the Puritan, from the Congregationalists, and then into being Baptists. So you can see there's a development of Protestantism. I don't think Protestantism is just a one-off change and then that's it. Because we're seeing, even in the big hitters like the Church of England and the Lutheran Church, they're having loads of offshoot branches. I mean, the Church of England, for example, have got the GAFCON. The GAFCON is like a massive umbrella that has churches all over the world with all their designated bishops, and not all of them are necessarily in communion with one another, but they are under the GAFCON umbrella, and they would say they have apostolic succession from that, even though they don't respect anything, the stuff that Justin Welby talks about. And he's meant to be the primate of them. The primate means not leader, but the sort of first among equal. So they're kind of a self-governed group now. They still hold to traditions of Anglicanism, but my point is they would still be Protestants, even though they've branched out. They're still coming from the same root. You know, when you imagine the whole church as a tree, and then you've got sort of the main trunk being Catholic Orthodox, and then you've got the church going east, and then the church going west. And obviously, most of the churches have come from the west, Roman Catholicism. So there you have it. I mean, that's my understanding of where the Baptist Church sit in all of this mess, and that tells me why so many Baptists are uncomfortable with the word Protestant, because they feel that it's only ascribed to the early reformers, and the early reformers did all believe infant baptism. They all believed in the perpetual virginity of Mary. And I think all of them, except for Zwingli, believed in some kind of real presence in the communion. But anyway, it's interesting nevertheless. But that's my 2p piece on it. If you are a Baptist and you disagree with what I said, please drop a comment and educate me. I'm welcome to be enlightened. But that's certainly the development of the Baptist Church that I can see. And obviously, there might be a few that I've not mentioned. I'm fully aware that there was the Baptists in Holland, the Dutch Baptists that came from the Arminian group. You had the Calvinist Baptists as well, which obviously came from Calvinism. So of course, there were offshoot groups from those classical reformers. But I think where we have to pinpoint is what is Protestant, and if you believe Protestant is just a one-off veer away from the Catholic Church, then no, Baptists are not Protestant. But if you believe that it's a developmental process, and even now we can continue to protest and change, then yes, of course, that they are Protestants. But depending on what view you come from, I think no one could argue that Baptists are either restorationists or Protestants. They're one or the two. They're certainly not a heretic group. I would not put them in the same window as Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, and Mormons, because Baptists are Trinitarian. They believe in the Christology of Christ, and many, well, I would say the majority, do uphold the Nicene and Apostles' Creed as well. So anyway, take care. Bye.